Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are waiting a few minutes to hopefully get a few more people to join, but we'll start here shortly. Okay, looks like we're getting close to the amount of people here. Welcome. I want to make sure that everybody can hear me loud and clear. Go ahead and give me a thumbs up if you want, or there we go. Got you on the screen. Thank you. So welcome. As you all know, we're here for the Code Hearing Committee, and we're going to talk about the IBC and the IEBC. If that's not what you're here for, then look, I would suggest pointing you to the Denver website to see which hearing that you wanted to be a part of, but that's the hearing that we're going to be talking about today. So a couple of housekeeping items that we'll take care of real quick. As you can see on the screen, give me another thumbs up real quick if you can see the agenda for today. Good, perfect. I want to make sure I'm sharing the right screen. I got quite a few going on, as I'm sure some of you do as well. And for you panelists joining, we ask that you mute yourself unless you're speaking, which it looks like most of you have already done so. That will just help on some background noises. The other thing we'd like to strongly suggest is that everybody that's on the panelist, please have your cameras on during this. We want to simulate a in-person meeting as much as possible. So as if we were all sitting in the room having a discussion with each other, but given the circumstances that cannot happen. So this may or may not be more convenient for you all, but we ask that you participate as if we were in the room with each other by having your cameras on throughout the duration of the code hearing. Once we open it up to the floor for the general public to talk, we will also ask that they turn on their camera to speak as if they were presenting to the room so everybody could hear and see them as well. So for those attendees out there of the general public, please keep that in mind. If you are going to speak, please be ready to turn your camera on so everybody can see who you are. One other thing, a couple other things, the housekeeping items, that we do have a note taker present, so that will be available for us all to read those notes. And let's see, I would like to ask if we have a quorum from our note taker.
Yes, it appears we do. We are missing just 3 individuals from what I could tell. And I would just like to confirm real quick. So I have Steve Thomas. Maybe I missed.
Steve Thomas was not available today. He's teaching in Idaho. This is Bill Clayton. He assigned me as his representative.
Okay, perfect. And let's see, Brian Parr. And Gary Moore. Okay, perfect. So everybody else has been accounted for, so it appears we do have a quorum.
Okay, great. Thanks, Charlie. So as a committee, I'd like to practice how we're going to vote. And so being that we're missing a few individuals, that's still okay. We still need quorum. So if we would like to take a vote to move forward, go ahead and raise your hand. And that's how we will be voting here in the future. So let's go ahead and practice that real quick. So again, raise your hand for the panelists, the committee members, to move forward or with the attendees we have. Okay, it looks like we're still waiting on a few more people. Okay, so I'm going to lower the hands, hopefully, if I do that right. I don't know if I can do that all at once. Okay, so I'm doing it individually, bear with me.
So Kevin, just to be
Okay.
clear, you want us to raise our virtual hand?
That's correct, but I did see a few people raise their hand on the screen. I realize that if you're on your cell phone, sometimes you aren't able to have all the functions as if you are on a computer. But yes, I would have liked you to raise your hand virtually.
Okay.
Okay, all those opposed to moving forward, same sign, raise your hand virtually. Okay, great. We had nobody opposed to moving forward, so we'll go ahead and move forward with the meeting. Is everybody okay with how we handled voting there? Again, this is going to be a little bit sticky because we're virtual, but I want to make sure everybody's comfortable with that. A couple thumbs up, good. All right, so let's continue on with a few more housekeeping items. We won't do this every time, but being the first time, there'll be some bugs that we all have to probably work out, so that's fine. But how these things are going to go is that we are going to be following Robert's Rules of Order, which we all have discussed in a previous meeting here. The proposal will be introduced by myself as the moderator. We will then ask the proponent of that proposal to speak. And we'd ask to include where you're from, just to help everybody know kind of your background on that. We will then ask any speakers in support of the proposal to speak. This is for the public. And so at that time, we'll ask the public to raise their hand if they wanted to speak in support of that proposal. They will be allowed 2 minutes. We will have a timer on the screen for those 2 minutes to speak whatever they wanted to speak about on that proposal. And after that 2 minutes, they will be muted if they are not done. After everybody that had an opportunity from the general public to speak in support of that proposal, we will then move to anybody that wants to oppose the proposal and speak in the opposition of it. So the general public, same thing, will raise their hand if they wanted to speak on that. They will get a 2-minute timer, which will be counted down on the screen. And when the time is up, they'll be muted. After all that, then the committee will open it up to the committee to ask questions amongst themselves, have a conversation on the proposal at hand. From there, we will then allow rebuttal and support in the general public, and that will be a 1-minute timer. And after everybody has had the opportunity to speak, we will then do a rebuttal and opposition with a 1-minute timer. From there, we will ask that somebody from the floor, one of these panelists or committee members, I'll use that term interchangeably, committee members or panelists, to make any recommendation, whether it's a modification or a call to vote. So those are the options, or a call to table, if we feel that there isn't sufficient time or discussion had. So that's kind of the overall process of Robert's Rules of Order in a nutshell, if you will. So before we get started, panelists, do you have any questions on that? Feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions. All right, David, I see you have a question. Go ahead.
Just one question. You mentioned the 2-minute timer for the public testifying in support. Does the original proponent have 2 minutes as well, or is that not limited? Or does everyone have 2
It
minutes?
is not limited. It is not limited when they're reading their proposal. You know, if their proposal takes, if it's 3 pages worth of text in their proposal, I'm not a fast reader, so I know it might take me more than 3 minutes. So we would ask that they stick to reading just their proposal and not add any commentary, though.
Just to clarify, Kevin, is it that the proponent will be reading the proposal completely or providing a summary of their proposal?
I would like for them to read it, but if a summary is just as fine as well. The only reason that I ask to read it is that if the general public has not been able to read that in full, that they would be able to read it. But you know, that I will have it up on the screen. I don't know if it's a long one, if everybody will be able to see the whole screen at once. So I guess let's go ahead and start with a summary, and if we need it to be longer on clarifications, let's do that. Okay, any other questions on Robert's Rules of Order? Okay, I don't see any. So last couple of housekeeping things. About halfway through, we will take a 5-10 minute break so that we all can answer emails, go to the restroom, grab a drink of water, whatever we need to do. About halfway through, we will take a break. So just a heads up on that. So I do ask that if you are in the meeting, that you please act like you're in the meeting and not answer emails and phone calls and whatnot. If you do have to excuse yourself, that's absolutely fine. Please just turn off your camera for the moment if you need to excuse yourself to take a phone call or go to the restroom or something like that. And then when you come back, turn your camera back on. Okay, with that being said, let's get started. Any other questions before we jump into the first proposal? Okay, great. So the first item of business, if you can see on my screen, is item number 10. Let me pull that up. Bear with me. All right. Again, I'll ask, just give me a quick thumbs up on your camera real quick if you can see the proposal on the screen. Good, okay. So with that, I will ask Alan. If Alan is on, I believe so. And Alan, I will allow you to talk. Go ahead and give us a summary on your proposal.
This is Alan Yunong, City and County of Denver, Senior Architect, do commercial plan review for community plan development. I don't know if my camera is on.
I don't see it.
See if I could, bear with me here.
Kevin, I believe when you allow the attendee to talk, you need to promote them to panelists in order for them to show their video. And
Thank
then
you. So Alan, you should be able to do that now.
Okay.
There you are, Alan.
I think you see me now. Okay, so Alan Yunong, City and County of Denver, a Senior Architect, I do commercial plan review for community plan development. This proposal it's a proposal to bring back 3 definitions that were deleted previously from the 2016 Denver amendments. Part of the process in that code cycle or amendment cycle was to try to move Appendix Q, which dealt with access control, back into the base code. These 3 definitions, after was discovered over the past couple years of using the revised amendments and the base code, that these were critical to regulate some of the items. We're proposing to bring back these 3 definitions back into our amendments because they address certain things that we felt were important to regulate back. And the 3 are electric bolts, an electric locks master switch, and a shear type magnetic lock. Now there are 3 other amendments that aren't scheduled for today. So I don't know if these 3 want to be, this amendment wants to be tabled until they could be heard in conjunction with those amendments, because I don't know if it makes sense, if there'll be an understanding of why these are being brought back. So I'll leave it up to the committee to decide that, but the proposal is to bring these 3 definitions back into the Denver amendments.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Alan. I'm going to take you out of the panel, and then I will ask anybody that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please go ahead and raise your hand.
Well, Kevin, real quick, this is Shauna. So as the SME on this IBC, I would just say that yes, proposal 11, 12, and 13 really deal with this issue. And if they're not approved, some of these words may never exist in the code, so it makes sense to delay it. However, there's also proposal 11, proposal, it looks like 11 is actually supposed to be heard today. One of them is heard and 2 are not. So I don't know if the committee decides to move one of them or to move the definitions to when the other 2 are heard, probably next hearing, then they probably should move number 11 also, I'm guessing, because they all deal with these terms. So just want to bring that up.
Okay, thank you, Shauna. Anybody from the general public that would like to speak in support of this proposal, go ahead and raise your hand. Not seeing any, so one last time, anybody from the general public that wants to speak support of this, please raise your hand. Okay, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Give it a minute. I'll ask a second time, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this. And the last time, anybody that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none from the general public, I will now open it up to the committee to have discussion. And in order to do this in a fashion where we're not talking over each other, let's go ahead and please raise your hand if you have something to speak about this proposal, whether you have questions amongst each other or whatnot. There is no 2-minute timer in this section, so go ahead and raise your hands if you have any commentary that you want to have on this proposal. David, I see your hand up. Go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, just to clarify, is this section for questions of the proponent, or is this committee discussion at this point, or both?
It's both. So if you have any questions that you wanted to ask in general, go ahead and ask those.
Okay, I do have one question for Alan. The first sentence in this ends with parenthetical that says typically, but not limited. I think it's supposed to be 2 delayed egress doors, secured elevator lobby doors, and stair tower doors. It's not typical in the code to have parenthetical phrases and examples like that. So I'm wondering if there's any harm if as a committee we propose to delete that section. I realize that's what it used to be in our code, but I think it reads better without it, and wondering if there's any harm in doing that.
Okay, we will wait to have Alan respond once we get the rest of the committee members' discussion. Next up, I see Julie. Go ahead, Julie, and unmute.
Yeah, just a couple thoughts here. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. The second sentence, and well, only the first sentence seems to be a definition. The other sentences seem to be requirements. So I wonder if there's a better place to put those other 2 requirements, maybe into IFC Chapter 5, where we list out what's required in the Fire Command Center. Or maybe in that 1010 section where we talk about requiring this master switch. And my second thought is, I don't see a proposed amendment to change IFC 508-166, which is the section that says in the Fire Command Center, you shall have essentially this master switch. We just haven't defined it as a master switch. So I think we also need to modify that as well.
Okay, thank you. Next would be, looks like David.
Hi, Alan. My question is about the impacts. You say no impacts for construction or design costs. Wondering how you determine that?
Okay, thanks, David. That was your question to Alan. We'll give him a chance to respond to that once the rest of the committee has an opportunity to speak. Next is Yvette.
Yeah, I just agree that in order to be able to review this, it would be best to table it and review it with the other propositions to get a holistic picture and edit everything all at once so we don't miss anything and have to backtrack.
Okay, thank you. Next, it looks like Keith.
Hi. This has been in our code. These definitions have been in our code since 1990, more or less. And the electric locks, master switches, this is access control. If there's not electric locks in a building, then there's no need to have this in the Fire Command Center. I'm a little concerned about, and maybe Tony Caro as well, putting a reference to these definitions in the fire code. Typically, the Fire Prevention Bureau Plans Review Group does not get involved in access control system plans review. So anyway, I'm not in favor of adding references to the fire code to enable this access control system provision, set of provisions to be implemented. Thanks.
Thank you, Keith. Next, Tony, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. And Keith, I agree with you, since building department typically reviews and permits these systems. Although in reference to Julie's comments, currently Fire Code section 508.1.6, item 6, does specify these manual controls for simultaneously unlocking stairway and refuge door areas. And I guess, Julie, I'd agree that maybe we can move this prescriptive toggle switch item to that section in the fire code so that we dictate what kind of switch we want to execute that function.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Any other discussion from the committee or panelists before we continue? No other discussion. So let's open it back up to the general public on any rebuttals. Also answering any of the questions that the committee members had internally with themselves. You'll have 1 minute to address those. Unfortunately, that's a little bit short of time. There's quite a few questions. However, anybody in support from the general public that wants to comment for a minute of time, please raise your hand.
Well, Kevin, pardon me, is there a way we can let Alan answer these questions first before we let people rebut? Because they don't know what to rebut necessarily.
Sure, I'm open to that, letting the proponent answer a few questions. So let me get Alan back on here. And Alan, you should be able to answer those questions, but I would like to limit this to a 2-minute response time.
All right. Okay. So from what just the questions that came up. So I'm not opposed to eliminating the verbiage in the parentheses. No issue with that. And then if the specific requirements want to move into, if we deem it's better to be in the fire code, I'm not opposed to that. But like Keith Peets mentioned, this has been a definition in our access control guide for many years. It was removed maybe erroneously last code cycle. And so I'm just trying to bring it back to help clarify some of the ways we have been enforcing things in the city of Denver. I think the other question had to do with cost. Same thing that, I have not seen in all the access control plans I've reviewed in the last 3 years, and some of my fellow reviewers have not seen electric bolts or shear type magnetic locks proposed. And I think that's because these definitions and regulations have been in the code so long that our contractors do not put them in. And so I'm trying to bring it back so it's not something that starts getting installed, and hence the position that it's not raising cost. And if there are any other questions I missed, happy to answer.
Okay, thanks, Alan. Let's go ahead then and open it up to the public for anybody that wants to speak in support of this. Please raise your hand. I don't see any. I'll ask one more time. Anybody in support from the general public that wants to talk about this, please raise your hand. Okay, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public in opposition of this proposal, please raise your hand. And a final call. Anybody in opposition from the general public, please raise your hand if you want to speak. Okay, seeing none. I would like to ask the committee, somebody from the committee, to make a movement or a motion. And the motion can be to accept, to amend, to make modifications, to reject, to table. But we need somebody to make a motion from the committee. I see a hand. David, go ahead and speak.
I want to make a motion to approve with the modification of taking out the parenthetical phrase.
Is there a second on that? Keith, are you seconding that?
I seconded. I would like to second that motion.
Okay. So the motion would be, just so I'm clear, if you can still see my screen, is to take out the highlighted area on the screen. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So I will delete that. And from there, Keith, I'm going to lower your hand. Aaron, it looks like you might have a comment. Go ahead and speak.
I was actually just going to second the motion and needed to lower my hand.
Okay. Any discussion? Yvette, go ahead.
I motion to table this until we review the rest of the amendments referenced in this amendment, and along with item number 11 on the agenda.
Sure. Unfortunately, there's already a motion to approve this with an amendment, so that would have to be not pass. That motion has to not pass in order to table it first. So unfortunately, that's how it works. But the rest of your committee members have heard you. Maybe they'll vote accordingly. Any other comments before we go to a vote? Looks like David raised your hand next. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to comment that, ideally these would be heard all together, but just knowing this access control sections pretty well in the code, these three terms are used in the code right now. These definitions have been in our code forever. They were just inadvertently left out last time when we moved access control from appendix into the body of the code. So there's really no intended code change as far as I can see from this. It's just putting back in some definitions for terms that are definitely used in our code right now, and I think they should get back in there. Thank you.
Sure. Julie, go ahead.
So I definitely agree with proceeding with this. I just want to emphatically say that the part that requires the 2-position toggle switch in a definition section is a little odd to me as a code consultant. I don't go looking in the definition section for features of a system. So if there was a way to take that and put it, maybe not in the fire code, maybe in IBC section 1010, there might be somewhere that would be better, or maybe put it in 2 places. I just kind of wanted to throw that out there.
Sure, thank you. Unfortunately, we have a motion already with the modification, so unless that motion is removed, we cannot hear another motion. So we'll keep that in mind, committee members, on that. Next up, we have Bill. Go ahead, Bill.
Actually, I've got a question for David Wren. David, you had noted that this was in your code previously. Did it include all the technical language as opposed to just the definition?
It did. I think what you're seeing here is exactly what was in our 2000 amendments to the 2015 code, with no changes other than the change that I proposed to get rid of that one phrase. But this is exactly how it's always been in the code.
All right, thank you.
It's great conversations. It's exactly what we want to talk about, is this kind of stuff. So this is great. All right, so I'm going to lower your hand, Bill. Shauna, who is our subject matter expert, has her hand raised. Go ahead, Shauna.
Yes, a couple things. One, agreed that technical language really should go in 1012, and maybe it would go in one of those other proposals where, or 1010.12, where you guys are using it, or 1010.2, 10.2.5, 2.12. somewhere in there that language should go, because no definitions have a requirement in them, and this says shall a few times. And so we probably ought to think about maybe removing that language and putting it somewhere else. And then there was also a request by Tony to maybe put this in 50816 number somewhere in there of the IFC. And so I don't know if the way that David moved it was just simply as modified. So I believe you're right. You have to vote on the as modified. If he would have done as submitted with the intent to modify, we could modify it 1,000,000 times. So there is that. I believe that there is that way of handling it. So in the future, if you do always say as submitted with the intent to modify, then you can modify it further and further. And then if all of those fails, you still have your as submitted. But if you do as modified as your first motion, then you have to always redo everything. And so just something to think about.
Thanks, Shawna, on that insight. Looks like we have Paul that has a question. Go ahead, Paul.
Sorry, I'm on my iPhone with technical difficulties on my laptop. So yeah, I just want to say I agree with Julie and Shauna that I think those requirements ought to be taken out of the definition and put in the appropriate place. So I think that means I will be voting no against the standing, what's the word I'm looking for? against the proposal in hopes it'll be modified. That's it.
Sure, thank you. Before we move forward, I will just do a point of order here, is that if for some reason this proposal does not pass, there can be a new call for a modification or something like that. So just keep that in mind as a point of order there. Keith, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Well, I was wondering if there would be some way to reformat the text of for electric locks master switch so that all of that would be part of the definition of what an electric lock master switch is for an access control system. I don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. And if an access control contractor is trying to design a system and wants to know what the required components are, I would think they'd appreciate it if they didn't have to search all throughout the entire code to know what's expected of them. And when you start to pull this part, this definition apart and locate it in different sections of the code, it complicates it for the user to know what they need to do or what's expected of them.
Okay, Keith, so that's good commentary. If that's something that you want to propose, I would say that come up with some type of definition that you're willing to accept with the team. But before we call a vote, any other commentary from the committee? Okay, seeing none, we'll call for a vote. So all those in favor for this amendment, this proposal as modified, or I should say, the proposal as written on the screen right now, go ahead and raise your virtual hand, all those in favor. Sorry, let me back up. Let me ask our note taker real quick, Charlie. Charlie, how many voting members do we have in attendance so we know how many needs to pass this? Sorry to put you on the spot there.
No, it's fine. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 14.
Okay, thank you. So we have 14 voting members in attendance today. So we would need a majority, which would be 8 members in favor of this to pass this. A tie would be considered a no in this scenario. So 8 is our magic number for right now. So, okay, so now I'll call vote for passing this proposal as written on the screen. Go ahead and raise your hand, your virtual hand.
And when you say, just for clarification, when you say written on the screen, it's because you have already modified it. So the proposal is for as modified by the way you've got
That's
it on
correct.
the screen now. Okay, thank you.
Correct. Okay, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, go ahead and lower your hands. Okay, all hands are lowered. All those opposed, please raise your virtual hand. We have 6. Okay, lower your hands.
I don't know if
And
you
all
counted,
those who have abstained, please raise your hand.
I think you missed a vote there. Paul Schultz was raising his hand, not virtually.
Oh, sorry, I didn't catch that. Paul, what was your vote for there?
My vote was no.
Okay, so we have 6 for and 7 against, and it must be 1 abstention then. Okay, so with those results, this does not pass. However, there can be a new motion from the committee members if they're so chooses. So if you have a new motion, please raise your hand. Yvette, go ahead.
Okay, so maybe with a little more background. So the reason why I still moved to table it is because just reading item number 11, it does use one of the definitions here that we were going back and forth on how to reword. It references the electric locks master switch. And that's why I think if we table it and review it all together, it'll help us all agree on the definition based on the context that it's used on, that it's used in the other amendments. So my motion is to table it so that we review all the propositions offered within this amendment.
Okay, so there's a motion to table this. It looks like Julie, you're up next.
I'd like to second the motion to table.
Okay, great. Aaron? You raised your hand. Okay, Stefan?
This is Steve. I was going to second the motion, but I wanted to make a comment, I guess, in support of the motion to table the item. I guess kind of just a reminder to the committee, our charge is, to try to get through these and not write a lot of code on the table or on the meeting. So my suggestion is that it's time specific for the table and that it's all inclusive to connect with all the items related to this particular item.
Very good, thank you. So yes, that would be something that I would charge you all with coming up with language if this does get tabled for the next conversation that you all can agree with. So whether that's having a breakout session individually with a small group of people, that's fine too. But that's something I would charge the committee with if it does get tabled. David, go ahead.
I just want to reiterate what Steve just said regarding writing a lot of code on the fly here. There were a lot of comments about moving some of these requirements into the body of the code. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but that in my mind is hard for the committee to do. That's more than just a minor change like deleting the phrase that I did. So if we do table this, I'd suggest to Alan that maybe he prepares a modification ahead of that would find a good spot to move those requirements. So that's coming from the proponent side instead of the committee trying to write this on the fly here, because if we're trying to find a spot on the fly, we're not going to get it right. If we do table it, hopefully there's maybe a modification that can address some of those concerns.
Great, yeah, that is definitely an option. You can take all the commentary from today and make a modification. Next up, Keith.
I would, we can table this just so that the committee can hear all the proposed changes together for context. And that step doesn't mean that we rewrite any of these provisions. It just means we want to hear them all together. And so that might be phase 3. If after everybody's heard all these proposals together, then they want to start to reconfigure the language. So I don't know that tabling this automatically means that it needs to be rewritten.
Thank you. Shauna, go ahead.
Yes, I was just going to reiterate what Keith said. Tabling it doesn't mean it has to be amended. However, if you want an amendment, I will work with Alan to find the proper place for it and to work with it, and then we'll have one ready for you if you want an amendment, but it doesn't mean it has to be amended. We will just make sure we have one ready. But I agree, it also needs, if it's tabled, it has to be time specific. So you would have to say, the motion needs to say tabled to, well, it did say to be heard with these items, so it can't be tabled further than that.
Okay, thank you, Shauna. So I believe that you were the one that raised the motion to table this. Do you want to put a time frame on that for us?
Yeah, to table it so that we review it with item number 11 on the agenda and the amendments referenced within this amendment, which is for IBC 1010 2.5, 1010 2.7-A, and 1010.2.12.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. All right, let's call for a vote on tabling this to be heard with the other proposals. All those
Just for the record, that's items number 11, 12, 13, and 14 for the note taker.
Thank you. So all those in favor of tabling this until then, please raise your virtual hand. And let's see, 1, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 for it. Okay, go ahead and lower your hand. Paul, I counted you this time. And let's see, everybody's hands are lowered. So anybody opposed to tabling this, please raise your hand. And anybody abstained, please raise your hand. There should be 2. Okay, great. Thank you. So this passes to be tabled. 11-4, 0 opposed, and 2 abstentions. We had a recount there. There's actually only 11 voting members. Sorry about that. That still doesn't change the first amount, the first voting that we had on this. So this item will be, this proposal is now tabled, and we will move on to the next one. Okay, item number 6. Let me find where I put that one. Give me a second. Bear with me. It always takes me a minute. It's loading. 6. We're gonna find which screen it's on because it's on a screen. Oh, there it is. Okay, item number 6. Looks like Michaela has this item as proposed list item. And I don't know if Michaela's on. If Michaela's on, go ahead and raise your hand so we can have you give a overview of this proposal. Not seeing anything again, Michaela, if you're on the line, if you wanted to give us a summary of this, please raise your hand. Yeah, ask one more time. If you're wanting to give a summary on this proposal, please raise your hand so we can unmute you. Okay, so I don't see,
I will say
John?
is in the chat, it says that Michaela is sick. I'm happy to give a brief on this one if you want.
Sure, go ahead, Shaw.
So this was her attempt to create some consistency between the codes right now. The Denver amendments to the IRC are the only place that a sleeping room is really defined. And so I did a search. IBC uses the word sleeping room 23 times, the IEBC 3 times, and the IFC 23 times, but they're not defined. And then usually you say, well, if it's defined in another code, then it's okay, but the IBC does not link over to a definition in the IRC like the IRC does to the other codes. So this is just Michaela's attempt to make sure that this definition is used the same in all of the codes.
Okay, thank you, Shauna. All right, so now that it has been presented to you all as a committee, I want to go ahead and open it up to the general public. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. I saw one go up but then go down. Okay, Daniel, I am going to promote you so that you can turn your screen on, your video on, and be unmuted. So Daniel, you're there, go ahead and there you go. You should be able to do so. And Daniel, you'll have 2 minutes. Daniel, are you there?
Hi, I'm a senior architect like Alan is working for CPD and reviewing architectural plans for commercial. And I don't know we can't speak to the benefit of having a definition or not, but the definition of a space with a closet is something that is used specifically by the residential team. And we don't use that as a criteria for sleeping room because in the IBC distinction between dwelling and sleeping units, there's no mention of a closet. So that's certainly something that would be new for us. And in general, unless otherwise determined at the sole discretion of the building official, is always an additional burden on us to, as reviewers, when we're pressured to make a determination different from, our current position at the time. So I prefer not to leave open language like that. But again, saying that a sleeping room has to have a closet is certainly has not been our practice or in our code.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. I'm going to now put you back to attendee. Anybody else from the public that would want to speak in support of this, please raise your hand so you can do so. Anybody else from the general public? Last time in support. Okay, anybody from the general public that is wanting to talk on opposition of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public in opposition that wants to speak, please raise your hand. And one last time, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition for this, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing no more comments from the general public, I will go ahead and open this up to all the committee members to have a conversation. Go ahead and raise your hand if you want to have any commentary. Again, there is no time clock on this, but please be succinct in your responses. So first hand I saw was Bill. Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, just observation, Daniel, it sounds like your comment is actually in opposition of this definition rather than in support of it, unless I'm misunderstanding what you're saying. But I don't really understand where having a closet adds to defining a space as a sleeping room. We see sleeping rooms in a lot of the homes we do plan reviews on, as well as in some R4s, R3s, R2s out of the IBC, where there is no closet. There might be a piece of furniture that serves as a place to hang clothes, but there isn't actually a closet. So I don't really see where adding the closet really defines it as a sleeping room. I'm going to be voting against this.
Okay, Bill, thank you. Steve?
Question for the proponent, but I guess since Shauna presented it, my question is, the definition for sleeping room is an amendment to the Denver IRC and is not defined in any of the I codes. Is that correct?
I see Shauna shaking her head yes.
Sorry, I didn't know if you wanted me to answer now or at the end, like.
If you could answer now, that would be helpful, because I would be in opposition to it. And I guess the reason for my opposition to it is I really don't care for the language otherwise determined at the sole discretion of the building official. That you normally don't find that kind of language in the I codes. And so that you answered my question. If that's strictly in the IRC Denver amendments, I would be opposed to putting this definition in the other codes.
I did do a search in all of the codes for the 15 and the 18 and the 21, and sleeping room is not defined, only in the Denver amendment.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Keith.
I would be voting against this amendment. I too looked up how many times the term sleeping room appeared in the IBC, 27 times, but I think that 26 of those 27 times it appears in conjunction with hospitals and institutional occupancies. And I bet that those sleeping rooms don't have closets. So, really what I think Michaela is trying to get at is egress windows. And in making certain that that the applicant doesn't tell us that a room is not a bedroom and therefore it doesn't need a egress window. And they use this as an indicator that if it's got a closet, it must be a sleeping room and therefore you need an egress window. Anyway, I don't think this definition is necessary. to be put into the IBC, IEBC, or IFC. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Next up is David.
Yeah, I'll be voting against this as well. Just a couple things to add on to what's already been said. I think it's a little dangerous to add a definition into the code unless you've really vetted each instance of that definition to see if it's applicable. I think this term sleeping room is used many times in the code, and it's not always used in the same way. So defining it may have some unintended consequences that we don't know about. And then the closet thing is just a little broad reaching. I mean, technically, this makes a kitchen with a pantry a sleeping room. Pantry is a closet for food. I mean, a living room, we open into your apartment, you have a living room with a closet to hang your coat. Now your living room is a sleeping room. And the only way to get around that is at the sole discretion of the building official. Just one other thing in terms of unintended consequences. Once you define something as a sleeping room, you actually change the structural loading on it. The load requirement goes from 40 pounds a square foot down to 30. So you get a big reduction, 25% reduction in load just by calling it a sleeping room. So that's just an example of an unintended consequence that I don't think we want to have. Thanks.
Good insight, David. Anybody else on the committee that wants to have a discussion or ask anybody from the public a question? Go ahead and raise your hand, speak now. If there are no other ones, we will open it back up to rebuttals from the general public. So I don't see anybody's hands raised, so I will open it up to the general public. Anybody in rebuttal for support? Again, for support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody in the general public in support of this, please raise your hand if you want to speak. One last time, anybody in the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Seeing none, let's go ahead and open it up for anybody in the general public in opposition that wants to speak on this. Please raise your hand and you can do so. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. And one last call for the general public. Anybody that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing no hands raised in either one of those, I would ask the committee member to make a motion. Someone can raise their hand to make a motion on this proposal. David, your hand is raised. Go ahead.
Motion to disapprove.
I'm sorry, that was a motion to disapprove this. Did I hear that correctly?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, Bill, go ahead.
Second the motion.
Second the motion, okay. Any other commentary? Okay, I will call the vote to disapprove this motion. Motion, I'm trying to read the name here. See what item number 6, the DBC IBC sleeping room definition. I will call a vote. So all those in favor of disapproving this motion, please raise your hand virtually. Again, we have 13 voting members, so we need 7 to pass this. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, go ahead and lower your hand. Once those are lowered, we still have one more. Okay, all hands are lowered. All those opposed to disapproving this, please raise your virtual hand. Okay, seeing none. All those that abstain, please raise your virtual hand. Okay, so we only had 11 voting out of the 13. Reminder that you have to vote one of the 3 ways. So I will take those 2 that did not vote as abstentions. So this proposal is not approved. Because it did not pass, is there a new motion for this or a motion to move forward? Okay,
We don't need a new motion.
motions. Oh, sorry, it passed for non-approval. Sorry, thank you. Very good. All right, so we've gotten through 2 in an hour. Not horrible, not great, but hey, we're getting through this, and that's the intent of this. So, round of applause to you all for good conversation so far. So let's move on to the next one, which would be item number 11. Again, it takes me a minute for items to come up on my screen, but as soon as it comes up, I will bring it on over. And this will be Alan to speak. So Alan, raise your hand if you want to give us a summary on this, and I will promote you on that. Before we do that, Shauna, you have a question?
Yeah, I just, in our motion, in the motion for the very first item, number 10, they proposed to have that one tabled until it could be heard with 11, 12, 13, and 14. And this is number 11. So I don't know if that means we automatically move this one or if it needs to be heard. But if so, then just throwing that out there.
Sure. So committee members, keep that in mind. If someone wants to make a motion right away, that's fine before we have Alan speak. But keep that in mind. It looks like Julie, you have your hand up.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to table to go over this along with number 10. Shauna, help me out. 13, 14, I think it is. Thank you.
Okay, great.
In 11, 12, 13, 14.
Thanks. Steve?
Just second the motion.
Okay, great. So we have a motion to table this to be heard with 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14 altogether. There's a second. So for the sake of time, we will take a vote and see if this passes or not, and we can go from there. So all those in favor of tabling this proposal until we hear 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 altogether, please raise your virtual hand. Again, we need 7 to pass, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10. Go ahead and lower your hand. And all those opposed to tabling this, please raise your virtual hand. Okay, we have 1. Go ahead and lower your hand, and that would be the final count of our votes. So this proposal is now tabled until we can hear all those together on that. So we'll move forward. Thank you. That now helped our time getting through 3 of these somewhat in an hour. Okay, item number 21. A second while it loads and pulls up onto my screen. And this is by David. And just a point of order on this, David, even though this is your proposal, you are still allowed to vote on this. Okay, so David, go ahead and speak and give us a summary on your proposal.
Okay, I'm David Ryan with the City and County of Denver, representing the development services on this one. So this proposal does a couple things. One is a clarification you see right at the top that adds a collection area with occupant access. And just for clarification, the supporting statement in this was actually incorrect. So I'm going to clarify that right away. Second sentence in that supporting information says that it clarifies that containers have to actually be provided, and not just that the room has to be able to accommodate them. This proposal is doing the exact opposite of that. This proposal is intended to clarify that these sections about the containers and the refuge rooms is about providing the building space and floor area for the containers for waste, recycling, and compost. It's not the part of the building code, in my opinion, to regulate whether owners actually have to provide the service of composting and recycling. That'd be more of a city ordinance type thing if the city wants to do that. So this proposal is kind of opposite of what the supporting information says. I apologize for that. But it clarifies that we're really talking about floor area that has to be provided for the containers. If you do provide the containers, there's some requirements that it points you to the IFC that they have to meet, but it doesn't actually require you to put the containers in. So that's one clarification in here. And then the other part is the occupant access. In 420.12.5 item 3, it currently says the recycling and compost containers shall be provided occupant access with collection area equivalent to that of the waste containers. So we often have in apartment buildings recycling and trash chutes in the building, and the occupants of the building have access to those, but they might not have access to the room that this amendment is intended to address. That might only be available to maintenance personnel in the building. So if that was the case, this item 3 would say, okay, well, I need equivalent, the same occupant access. So if I'm providing recycling and trash chutes, now I also have to provide compost chutes. And that really was not the intent. The intent was that the occupants of the building need access to the actual refuge collection area, typically at the grade level of the building. So that's what that first part of this proposal does with adding in with occupant access in the first section. And then beyond that, there's a couple little editorial cleanups to go along with it, but those are the main 2 items. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the summary, David. Shauna, you have your hand up. You want to go ahead and speak?
Yeah, just real quick. I helped write the supporting statement, and so that is truly an error that about the room has to be able to accommodate them. That was me transposing, so I just wanted to verify what David said, that truly was not the intent. It was actually the other way around. No.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. So now that we've heard a summary of this, let's ask the general public. Anybody that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand and we will allow you to talk. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. And third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, we'll move to the next order. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Again, so anybody that wants to speak in opposition from the general public, please raise your hand so we can unmute you. And one last call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, we will then open it up to the committee members to have conversation. Looks like Bill, you raised your hand first, so Bill, go ahead and give us your commentary.
Yeah, David, I can't see the whole proposal on my screen, but what do you presume that the cost of this would be? The added cost to construction?
None really, because this section's already in our code, these requirements for the refuse collection areas. This proposal is really some clarification items in my mind, questions that have come up since we added this to the code that I'm just trying to clarify it. But the requirements are already there in the code.
All right, so it's not a new requirement, it's just in a clarification to what's already there.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
And next up would be Yvette.
Yeah, I think it just provides clarification. I agree with it. I think it's pretty straightforward. My only question was, and you answered it, David, when you did your presentation, was just if there are no chutes for the compost, how will the compost be, disposed of? And you answered that when you went over the second section, saying that it's just accessible to the occupants. So that answered my question. So, yeah, thank you.
Anybody else from the committee that wants to speak on this either way or have conversation? If seeing none, I will open it back up to the general public. Anybody in the general public that wants to talk in support of this, please raise your hand. I do see one hand raised with David. David, I'm going to promote you so you can talk. And turn on your camera. You should now be able to do that. Again, this is for support of this proposal.
Yeah, sorry, I'm actually a committee member and I didn't have audio options, but whatever you just did gave me back, or video options, I mean, so whatever you just did gave me back, put me back as a panelist as opposed to public, so thank you.
Sorry about that. Okay, anybody from the general public wants to speak in support? And finally, anybody in the general public in support? Okay, seeing none, anybody for the general public that's against or opposed to this, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. And one last call. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, I will open it back up to the committee for any modifications, a call to a motion to vote, or a motion for approval, a motion for disapproval. It sounds like there needs to be a modification as submitted from what I've heard. So maybe someone wants to make a motion to modify this based on the information, on the supporting information that David was speaking about. But anyway, committee members, it's up to you. Go ahead and raise your hand if anybody has a motion. David, go ahead.
It's just a question. For item number 1, it's access to public way or on-site vehicular access. Does that preclude, like, if the collection area was adjacent to a sidewalk, and so bins or containers could be rolled out to a place where they could be picked up by vehicles?
Is that a question to David?
Yes.
Well, just to be clear, that is not part of this proposal. There's no underlines there. That is part of our code right now. So that's not part of the proposal or the change that we're considering.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for that clarification. Next would be Aaron.
It's also a question. The supporting information had an error in it, but I believe that the actual code language that we'd be adopting, no proposal or no modification is proposed. So I would actually propose that we adopt or propose to vote to adopt the amendment.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. You have that?
I just second that motion.
Okay, great. Okay, so there's a motion and a second to approve this. Real quick before we get onto vote, Charlie, I know we hit with David joining, and it looks like Juan joined. I want to get an updated count of how many voting members we have to make sure we all know things have changed a little bit and what numbers we need to have.
So David, I had marked initially as president. I'm not sure if something happened during the meeting where it kicked him out of being able to have his video on and vote, but he was in the original tally.
Yeah,
And then
something the
so
screen, I had the screen glitched, and when it came back, I was no longer a panelist. So I don't know how. I don't know if you caught my votes on the last two.
Yep. Okay, so 7 to pass. All those in favor of approving this proposal as written, please raise your virtual hand. Moment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. All right. It's approved unanimously. Go ahead and lower your hands. Okay, next item of business. Again, give me a second. Will be P18. So this is from Gregory. Let's see if Gregory is on the line to give us, he is, okay. A summary on this. And Gregory, give it a minute and you should then be able to come over and turn your video on and give us a summary on your proposal.
Oh, hang on, working on video. Slow to respond. There we go. Here I am. Okay. I'm Greg Kingsley.
So Gregory, just tell us who you're representing, and then go ahead.
Okay. I'm Greg Kingsley, and today I'm representing the Building Department Liaison Committee of the Structural Engineers Association of Colorado. And I'm speaking for an amendment proposal that is associated with section 602.4.2.2 of the code, which specifically addresses type 4B mass timber buildings. I'm going to not read the whole thing, but I'm going to try to read the important sections of it and then do a little bit of summarizing. But starting from the top, this is about protected area of fire protection of mass timber elements. So 602.4222 protected area says interior faces of all mass timber elements, including the inside face of exterior mass timber walls and mass timber roofs, shall be protected in accordance with section 604.2.2.1. And then there are exceptions. And those say that unprotected proportions of mass timber ceilings and walls complying with section 602.4224 and the following. One, unprotected portions of mass timber ceilings and walls complying with one of the following. And there's 3 different provisions. The proposed changes affect 2 of those. The first is 1.1, unprotected portions of the mass timber ceilings, including attached beams, shall be permitted and shall be limited to an area less than or equal to 100% of the floor area in any dwelling unit or fire area. So the change that's being proposed here is primarily the change from 20% to 100%, allowing exposure of the complete area of the ceiling, and then the language less than or equal to. The next section, section 1.2, addresses another option. Unprotected portions of mass timber walls, including attached columns, shall be permitted and shall be limited to an area less than or equal to 40% of the floor area in any dwelling unit or fire area. In this section, only the less than or is the added language. The 40% remains the same from before. And then the third provision I'll just summarize is unchanged and addresses when you're combining unprotected portions of ceiling and walls, that there's some equations that you apply to provide a balance for those. So I will read then the next revision, 6024224, and then talk a little bit about the motivation. This says separation distance between unprotected mass timber elements. In each dwelling unit or fire area, unprotected portions of mass timber walls shall be not less than 15 feet from unprotected portions of other walls measured horizontally along the floor. And what has been stricken here is the language that included separation from ceilings. So this is just about separating unprotected areas of one wall from areas of other walls. In other words, you can't have two unprotected walls meeting at a corner within 15 feet, okay? Speaking generally about the reason for this, now I want to say that this provision that I'm putting in, I'm proposing, is actually a proposed amendment to the IBC that was made nationally for the 2024 IBC, and it was voted on and passed in 2021, both at the committee action hearings in April and then at the public comment hearings in September. So this is a provision that will go into the 2024 IBC exactly as proposed here. I've made no changes at all from the national provision. So really we're talking about a provision that will be a part of 2024 IBC, and then of course the Denver Building Code whenever they adopt that version. The fundamental reason for the national change was that original limitations, specifically the 20% exposed area in the ceilings, were driven not so much by, let's just say, scientific reasons, as for the fact that the Tallwood Building Committee agreed only to include provisions or criteria that had been tested. And in the previous fire test of ATF, physical limitations of the testing facility did not allow them to expose more than 20% of the timber. In the last code cycle over the last 3 years since adopting the Tallwood provisions, they went to RISE, a Swedish fire testing facility. They were able to do the tests outdoors that did not have those kinds of limitations. And then in so doing, they were able to show in 5 different tests that exposing 100% of the ceiling, even with adjacent exposed timber up to 78 and 90% of the floor area, met their criteria. Even with that, they're not proposing any change in the exposed wall area, but just to expose 100% of the ceiling area. So that was the driver for the national provision. And I think that in the context of the Denver amendments, I believe that really the important issue is, why should Denver be adopting these early? Why don't we just wait 3 years until it shows up in the 2024 IBC? And you know, the arguments in favor are really the same as what were proposed 3 years ago when SEOC asked that we adopt all the Tallwood provisions early, which they did, or which we did as the city of Denver. And then those provisions are now incorporated in the 21 IBC, and the amendments are no longer necessary. I'm proposing to do the same thing with this change, this small change, and then you know, the reason
okay,
that
Greg,
yeah, yes,
Gregory, I'm going to have to cut you off.
Please.
I think you gave a very good summary there.
Okay.
Sorry to cut you short, but I think you summarized it fair enough there, and there will be another opportunity for you to speak here in the future. So thank you for your proposal, and we will open it up to other members of the community here shortly. But Shauna does have a question.
No, I don't have a question. I just wanted to state that after doing a lot of research, one, yes, Denver adopted the Tallwood provisions before they made it into the code, because the codes were being written at the same time. The Denver Code and the National Code were being written at the same time in 2018, or for 2021 National, 2018 Denver. And so they were already in there. We revised the base amendments to be what's in the 2021 now, so that your base amendments going in will be that. This proposal truly does only change what was changed in the 2024. At the national level, G147 was heard by the committee, approved as submitted. Their reason stated that the proposal was approved as submitted since the provided preliminary RISE test report indicated that the test met or exceeded the requirements. He has truly given you what is going to be in the 2024. It went then to public comment. There were some public comments proposed, but none of them passed. And so it passed as submitted with the online governmental vote as well. And so you see before you exactly what will be in the 2024. And like he said, you adopted all of the provisions before they went into the code. So this, it is reasonable to see why you would bring a 2024 item into your 2021. Thank you.
Thanks, Shauna, as a subject matter expert on that. I will ask for the general public, if there's anybody in support of this proposal, please raise your hand and you can speak if you would want to speak. General public, if you want to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. And one last time, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Seeing none, we'll move to opposition. So anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody that wants to speak in opposition, raise your hand from the general public. And a third and final call for anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition. Okay, seeing none, I'll turn it back over to the committee for them to raise their hand and ask any questions or clarifications, commentary, anything you want to speak about. Go ahead and raise your hand if you want to speak. Julie, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Shauna, thanks for filling us in on that. Without knowing that this was exactly the same as the 2024 language, and without knowing that it had been cleared in the September hearings, I went and did my own reading of the RISE test report, and I felt comfortable with the test that they did. I felt that the code language they're putting in, especially for separating the walls 15 feet, addresses the major concern out of that RISE report, which is that if you have exposed wood in a corner, two walls in a corner, that you could have compromised fire decay. And so I just want to say that I feel comfortable with this amendment.
Thank you. Keith, you're up next.
Rats.
Keith, you're on mute. I think you did the opposite there. Hit one too many times. There you go.
Well, I was wondering if I'd like to propose a change to exception 1.1. And I would wonder if it would be better grammar to say unprotected portions of mass timber ceilings, including attached beams, shall be unlimited, rather than limited to an area of less than or equal to 100%. I mean, that's unlimited in fewer words. So anyway, I don't know that it's that, well, shall be unlimited in a dwelling unit or fire area. That I would propose that we make that. I will propose that approved as modified if it gets to that point.
Okay, noted. Thank you. David, you're up next.
Just one comment on Keith's comment there. I don't disagree that might be better wording, but this is the way the 24 code is going to be. So if we do push this or pull this forward, the idea is our amendment would just go away in 2024 rather than creating a different amendment to reword it. So I think I'd propose keeping it the same. But just a couple other comments to what this proposal does. It will lower the cost of construction a bit for this type 4B construction. We pulled this mass timber into our code, 3 years early. We really haven't seen many projects, if any, use it yet. We have heavy timber projects, but not the new types of construction. And I think part of that is the barriers that are in the code in terms of how much gypsum board protection is required. This lessens that requirement, reduces the cost of construction, and hopefully will encourage this type of construction a little bit more, which I think is kind of in line with Denver's climate goals. Lastly, on a selfish note, I review and approve administrative modifications for our group, for the architectural and structural group. And if we don't get this in the code, I'm guessing I'm going to be getting, one admin mod every few months for this one particular issue. So I'd just soon get it in the code than have to keep approving admin mods for it. Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else from the committee that wants to speak up? Any questions or commentary? Okay, so I'll open it back up to the general public. Anybody that wants to speak, answer any of those questions in support from the general public, please raise your hand and we'll unmute you. Anybody in support that wants to speak from the general public, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, we'll move to opposition. Anybody from the general public in opposition of this, please raise your hand if you wanted to speak. Anybody that wants to speak in opposition from the general public, please raise your hand. And one last time, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, I will turn it back over to the committee for someone to make a motion. It sounds like Keith had one going, but we need an official motion now that commentary is done, one way or the other. Aaron, your hand went up first.
I make a motion to approve the motion.
Second.
Kevin, we can't hear you.
Thank you. I don't see anybody having any other discussion there. So there is a motion on the table to approve as written and a second. So all those in favor, I'll call a vote. All those in favor of approving this as written, as submitted, please raise your virtual hand. And I'll start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, you can lower your hand. The motion passes unanimously on this. So good job. Thank you, everybody. So that brings us through, I believe, that P18 on there. So with that, we're about halfway through. I wanted to go ahead and let's take a break for, let's do 10 minutes. I'll set a timer so that anybody can address emails, run to the restroom, grab a drink or something like that. But please be back in 10 minutes, and I'll set a clock here so everybody knows there's a countdown. And feel free to turn your cameras off for the time being if you want. And we'll see you in a little bit. Okay, for those of you that can hear me, we got about a minute and a half left. If you want to start finishing up what you're doing and start getting your videos back on, that'd be great. Hey, Shauna, can you see the timer on my screen? I never asked that. Okay, great. I see it on mine, but I didn't ask if everybody could see that or not. I don't know if I like the timer being up there or not. It's kind of like one of those things, it's like a New Year's clock. Like, what's going to happen? Is there going to be confetti and everything, or what? But it's, at least it
Now
gives
we're going to
everybody an
expect
idea
it.
for-
Now,
Yeah.
now we expect that
Yeah.
confetti. Something
Yeah.
fun better
I'll see
happen.
what I can do for the next meeting. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, it looks like people are joining back. Thanks, everybody. Our time's up here for our 10 minutes. So our break is now over. I do want to say that conversation has been really great. And thanks again for everybody on being part of the committee, and even general public for being there to speak if they want to, or just to listen. So good job, everybody. We got a little over an hour left for the day, so let's finish this out strong. And thanks everybody for your time on this so far. So the next item is item number 83. I believe I have that one in a Word file, so I am going to drag over what I have as a PDF, and this is from David. So David, go ahead and give us a summary on your proposal.
David Wren, City County Denver, representing Development Services. And I'll apologize in advance. The next 7 items are mine. So you might get sick of hearing from me, but that's just the way it went. So we're gonna start off on an easy one here. This section 703.2.3 is brand new in the 2021 codes. It gives specifically says that, you know, one way to determine a fire resistance rating is to use an alternative method that's allowed by the alternative method section of the administrative part of the code. Unfortunately, we delete the IBC's administrative section for the most part and rewrite our own. So all this proposal is doing is getting that section reference correct to our administrative section instead of the administrative section of the IBC that we delete. So pretty straightforward.
Okay, thanks for the summary. All right, so now we want to open it up to speak. Anybody in support of this proposal from the general public, go ahead and speak, or raise your hand so you can speak. Anybody in support from the general public that wants to speak, please raise your hand. And anybody from the general public that wants to speak in favor or support, I should say, of this proposal, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, I will switch now to anybody that wants to speak in opposition from the public. Please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand so we can unmute you. And last and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, I'll move it back over to the committee to open up for any comments, questions, concerns, conversation, committee members. Wow, maybe that break was great. Okay, committee members, there's no conversation to be had that I see. No one's raising their hand. All right, Steve, we got a hand raised. All right, we got a couple of hand raised. There we go. Steve, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
There you are.
There I am. I'll make a motion to approve based on the supporting information presented.
Okay, Yvette?
I didn't have a chance to look at the 106 of the Denver Building Code. I guess my question is just a clarification. What does it say different from section 104.11, which asks for research reports and tests? It just might be something that I just don't know.
Sure, David, want to go ahead and answer that?
Yeah, it's really the corresponding section from the IBC. It's our version of that section. It might have some little bit of changes to it, but it's the alternative materials and methods section. And we delete the one from the IBC, so we can't refer to that one.
Okay.
I guess, does it ask for,
sorry,
I guess, does it ask for something different from research reports and tests if it's not crossed out?
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head exactly what the wording is in that section. But it is the corresponding section to the building code, so.
Okay, so maybe a different committee member can answer your question, Yvette. But in the meantime, David did have his hand raised next, so David, go ahead.
I'll just second Steve's motion.
Okay, Shauna, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to address her to just let her know that 3/4 of the jurisdictions, when adopting a code, remove all of the administrative provisions and replace it with their own. So it's not necessarily that they're doing something less restrictive or more restrictive in having their 106. It's just common to take all those admin provisions out and replace them with your own. And they have a whole section on admin provisions. I can look through it while you guys are going through, but I don't think it's necessarily that there's a change. It's just them making their own admin provisions like most people will do.
Thank you.
Okay, any other conversation from the committee? Keith, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, we are working on reformatting our administrative provisions. We basically delete most of chapter 1 out of the IBC and replace it with our own version of the administrative provisions, and that's a work in progress. We're getting close to closure, but I don't think with the modifications that we've made, there no longer is a section 104.11. That's the change that we're making, right, Dave? We're deleting the reference to 104.11 and replacing it with the reference to 106.
That's correct.
Yeah, so it's a dead end. You know, but just to opine a bit more, I think this might have previously sent people to modifications under special circumstances, which we sort of call administrative modification request process, rather than alternate methods and materials. They're both for requests that aren't in the code, aren't prescriptive provisions in the code. It's just that the alternate methods is more scientific, more test verifiable, verifiable, whereas the other reference to modification under special circumstances is the applicant asks us to accept something that meets the intent of the code, and they believe it's an equivalent to the prescriptive provisions in the code, but it's not the letter of the code, it's an equivalent to the letter of the code. I don't know if that makes sense, but so Dave's reference is probably better suited to fireproofing than an administrative modification request pointer. Thank you.
And if I could just add to that, the building code, chapter 1 has those two options as well. This new code section specifically points to the alternative method section, not the modifications. And this proposal does the same thing. So it's just matching what's done in the building code.
Okay, any more commentary from the committee? Okay, seeing none, I'll move back to the general public. Any rebuttal in support of this from the general public? If you want to speak, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. One last time, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, I'll move to the next category, which is anybody in opposition from the general public that wants to speak, please raise your hand. Anybody from general public in opposition that wants to speak, please raise your hand. And the final call for anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, we'll move back to the committee for our nomination, or a motion, I should say, sorry, a motion. I know we had one earlier, but we were a little bit out of order. So if we want to have a motion, please raise your hand. Steve?
Sorry, I made the motion too early. Was trying to keep things moving.
That's all right.
So I'll make the motion
I hear you.
now, based on the substantiation and the discussion given.
Great. David?
Second it again.
All right, thank you. All right, I'll call for a vote. Before we do that, Charlie, I just want to make sure that everybody came back from the break and our numbers are still 13, which would be 7 to pass. It looks like we still have the same number on. I don't know if everybody, it looks like everybody's video is on. So, all right, all those in favor of passing this, please raise your hand virtually. Start counting. 1, 2, 13. Okay. Go ahead and lower your hand. This passes unanimously. Okay, next item, item number 84. Or also another PDF, 7058. All right, David, give us a rundown on this one.
Dave Grant again, representing development services on this one. So table 705.8 in the building code gives the allowable areas of exterior wall openings based on fire separation distance. And there's a footnote G that refers to open parking structures that gives you unlimited openings at a 10-foot fire separation distance. We've had architects challenge that since it just says open parking structure there, it's not a defined term, there's no requirements, that allowance would be given to any parking area that they deem to be open, if you will. So what this proposal does is it changes that generic term open parking structure to a defined term open parking garage, and then adds that it's in accordance with section 406.5, which is important to this because an open parking garage has very specific requirements in terms of opening opening requirements, as well as a construction type. So if there is a fire, it's a non-combustible construction type that won't be involved with the fire. And open parking garages get a lot of leeway in the code because of the provisions in 406.5. So this proposal changes it to be that defined term. It is also a proposal that is going into the 2024 code. It's already been voted on in the Group A hearings. It's gone through public comment. And I forget what I put. Yeah, it was a 13-0 committee vote. So I think we're in good shape there, but I'd rather, we pull it forward for 3 years here and then just take it back out in 3 years once it's in the building code, just so we don't have to have that argument with design teams of what an open parking structure is for this allowance of unlimited openings. So please support this proposal.
Thank you, David, for the summary of the proposal. Sean, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just reiterating what David said, the committee heard it and agreed with the reason statement, which David put in your in the proposal itself. He gave the reason statement for why the committee, or why the proponent heard it. The committee agreed that the proposal clarified the requirements or what requirements had to be met for unlimited openings when you're dealing with these. So 13-0, no public comment, no online government consensus vote required. The government voting members agreed with the committee.
Thanks, Sean. Okay, general public, is there anybody that wants to speak in support of this proposal? Raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. And anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, anybody from the general public in opposition of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. And one final time for the general public, anybody that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, I'll turn it back over to the committee. Anybody that wants to speak on this, please raise your hand. Bill, go ahead. Bill, you're on mute there.
That's maybe better.
There you go.
Yeah, I just think it's a simple change that does exactly what's intended, so I support it.
Okay, great. Anybody else from the committee that wants to speak to this at all? Any questions? Anybody? Okay, one last time. Anybody from the committee that has any questions or wants to put any commentary? Okay, seeing none, back to the general public. Anybody in the general public for support that wants to speak, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public in support that wants to speak, please raise your hand. And third and final call for anybody in the general public in support of that wants to speak, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go to opposition from the general public. Anybody that wants to speak, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public in opposition, please raise your hand if you want to speak. And final, third call for the general public. Anybody that wants to speak in opposition for this proposal, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, we'll back to the committee for a motion. Bill, go ahead.
Motion to approve as submitted.
Okay. Julie?
Second to approve.
Okay. Anybody else? So there's a motion to approve as submitted and a second. Seeing no other conversation from the committee, I'll call a vote. All those in favor is approving this as submitted, please raise your hand. Start counting. 13. Okay. We do have a unanimous vote on there. So this passes. I did see somebody from the general public that raised their hand, but is now lowered. The vote is final. This is passed. 13-0. Okay, 13-0. Same thing as the other committee there. Way to go. Okay, item number 17. While my screen is over. While that's happening, David, I believe this one's yours. If you do want to go ahead and give an overview while it's loading on my end.
Sure. So this one, again, has to do with allowable openings of buildings, similar to the last one. We currently have an amendment that allows you to increase the amount of openings in a fire resistance rated exterior wall if you protect those openings with water curtains. And as currently written, it would, for example, a fire separation distance of between 5 and 10 feet. The code would allow 25% of the wall to be open. Our amendment allows it to go to 50% with water curtains. But that's only if you have an NFPA 13 sprinkler system. If you have an NFPA 13R sprinkler system, in table 705.8, you have to use the unsprinklered values. So our amendment actually allows you to jump from 10% allowable in the base code all the way up to 50% openings in the wall with a water curtain. So it's up to a 40% increase where the base code would require a fire resistance rated exterior wall. And our amendment currently allows that to be replaced with openings, be it windows or doesn't even have to have a window in it if it's a garage or something, with water curtains. I'm proposing to delete this because it's really, this amendment has no characteristics specific to Denver. It's less restrictive than the IBC, and most importantly, and we'll talk about this a bit, it, in our opinion, is not effective in preventing fire spread from a fire from an adjacent building to the building that you're working on. Also, IBC 703.2 in the code requires that a fire resistance rating be achieved without the use of sprinklers. But our current amendment does just that. It says I can take a fire resistance rated wall and replace it with sprinklers, which goes against the general thought in the code that you don't replace passive protection with active protection because it might be less reliable. In this case, the water curtain's also less reliable, but it's not as reliable, but it's also not effective when you're trying to prevent a fire spread from an adjacent building. The reason for this is the fire in the adjacent building would first have to breach the windows. You have to get through the windows of the building, start a fire in your building just to activate those sprinklers. And then if it's a large fire next door, this can happen along a long length of the building, along the height of the building and multiple stories. And the sprinkler system in your building is not designed to handle that. So it'll quickly get overwhelmed because the hydraulics are overwhelmed in the system. This would allow the fire to then spread uncontrolled through your building. One of our fire protection engineers from DFD will be speaking about this a little bit more after me. Should be noted, this proposal does not affect existing buildings. The existing building code has some provisions that I outlined in the proposal that will allow up to 50%. So buildings that have used this in the past won't be affected. Lastly, just want to mention I gave a history in the proposal. I won't go through it in detail, but this amendment goes back to 1991 UBC. Exterior wall opening provisions have changed drastically since then. The opening allowances have gotten more restrictive, more refined. Our amendment has essentially stayed the same since then. So I would urge your support of this proposal. bring Denver in alignment with the building code regarding this critical fire protection requirement, and really bringing it in alignment with every other jurisdiction that has to deal with this in the IBC. I don't know of any other jurisdiction that allows such a thing as this. So with that, I just urge your support.
Thanks for the summary, David. We'll turn it over to the general public. Anybody that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. I do see a couple people raising their hand. First hand I see is Brian. So Brian, I'm going to allow you to turn your camera on here momentarily. You should be able to do that now and speak. You'll have 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, everybody. Brian Lucas, Denver Fire Department. I've been with the department for 14 years. I have 6 years of private consulting experience prior to that. And I have a master's degree in fire protection engineering. I'm in support of removing this current amendment for multiple reasons. The first is that the exception allowing water curtains specifically references water curtains in NFPA 13. This NFPA 13 section is not designed for exposure protection. It's also not designed for any limitation of radiative heat transfer, which is your primary mode of heat transfer in exposure fire. This section is intended to and specifically referenced in NFPA 13 for vertical openings and proscenium openings. That's it. And on an interior vertical unprotected opening, typical 4-story convenience stair, the intent of this section is to stop fire from rolling up your chimney, your opening, and to keep it on the floor and allow the system to operate. It's not to stop radiative fire across your opening. And it's used in conjunction with the draft curtain, again, to hold heat on the floor of the fire to allow the sprinkler system to operate. Secondly, when you're using this provision, you are not required to calculate every sprinkler around the opening when you're using closed sprinklers. This has you don't calculate every floor of your opening when you're doing a stair, and you also don't require a calculation of every window. So that means that if you have an exposure fire from across from a neighboring building, you may only have one window calculated to operate during an exposure fire, which is not the intent of the protected opening provisions, which would require all of the building. So again, this amendment as currently written lessens the code below national levels of safety, and I urge you to support and approve as written. Thank you.
Very good, Brian. You ended right on time. Okay, I'll change you back there. We have a couple more attendees. The next person is Mark. Mark, you should here shortly be able to turn your camera on and speak in support of this proposal. Okay, camera, looks like your camera's coming on. Still no audio yet. Okay, camera's on. Still no audio. I'm just going to, okay, go ahead.
Mark Jelinski. I am a mechanical and fire protection engineer, consulting engineer in the Denver building construction industry. I can't add anything more than was already stated by Brian and David. I just wanted to add a positive commentary from the general public and consulting engineering community. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I'm going to put you back to an attendee, and we do have another person for the general public. Daniel, here shortly, you should be able to talk and turn your video on any moment now.
Hey, this is Daniel again, senior architect doing plan review for CPD. And I'm also supporting that the Denver code should not need to be less restrictive with regard to exterior wall openings than the IBC. There's really no basis for that. So I'm in support of this. I would like to clarify, and maybe it's a question to David Wren, because there is a section in 705.8.2 in the IBC that does provide an exception for protected openings, and that exception is to provide a water curtain. Again, protected openings is in table 705.8 is allowing an increased percentage of openings. However, and this is what maybe Dave could speak to, that water curtain protection is moot because it's for a building that's protected with NFPA 13 sprinklers. And when you have that protection, you're anyhow on the same level of opening allowed by the table. So the table essentially is redundant in having a sprinkler building have, let's say, 45% openings allowed, and then having a building with sprinklers and a water curtain also have 45% openings. So there's really no benefit in the code. I'm not sure what that exception is intended for in 705.8.2. Maybe there are other applications where you could use it, but it would seem to not, it acknowledges the water curtain for exterior wall opening protection, but it does not increase from the percentage in the table. So that being the case, the IBC does not allow an increase for water curtains. We should not either.
Thanks, Daniel, for that. I'll go ahead and put you back as an attendee. Comment. Okay. Anybody else from the general public that would like to speak in favor and support of this proposal? The last call for the general public in support of this proposal. Okay, moving on to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. And last time, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, I'll turn it back over to the committee members now. Committee members, any commentary that you want to have on this? Now's your opportunity to have that commentary. Okay, ask one more time, anybody that wants to speak on commentary for this? Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Steve Rondinelli. I'll kind of make some comments from a historical standpoint because there's been discussion to the relevance of this approach with protecting openings. And as the senior member of the committee, I can share with you that this provision went well back into the 80s, late 80s, and truly did allow Denver to redevelop a lot of downtown Denver. I mean, I was part of approving admin mods for dozens and dozens of buildings, writing admin mods for dozens and dozens of buildings. And kind of the natural progression was that then in the early 90s, it became a component of the code. And I'm not necessarily speaking in opposition to it. I'm just sharing how we got to that. And it is a very successful method of holding fire at openings from adjacent buildings. So picture a lot of, and I know we're not talking about existing buildings, but they are very successful in keeping fire out of buildings at window openings and other openings from adjacent buildings. So picture a lot of the buildings that are adjacent to alleys that have openings. Those no longer could have openings. And so this was a methodology to accomplish that. I'm not necessarily in opposition to it, but I'm just sharing that it's not something that was willy-nilly in the code for the last 30 plus years. And maybe it is a good time to take it out and follow with the IBC, but it also did have some good provisions from a fire protection standpoint. Some of it probably anecdotal, but also a lot of it very successful. I can speak as a retired firefighter, I've seen single heads keep a lot of fire out of window openings. So I just wanted to share that with the group, that before we throw it out, that it is in a lot of buildings and probably does have a place, and designed properly could be a method of protecting openings in a building.
Thank you for that commentary. Anybody else from the committee that wants to speak or have any questions for committee members or the general public? David, go ahead.
This is in response to what I just heard from Steve, and I'm wondering, not being an expert on this, but knowing Steve's expertise, is there an adjustment to this that you might suggest, Steve, or is there, can you give us a picture of what type of projects would not have happened without this?
You know, the application that I see it in new construction, I'll say outside of Denver, because this is an accepted practice in Denver, but outside of Denver, where you have conditions, where you have a new building, that it's location near a property line impacts the percentage of openings, and it's alongside of another property that has a 50-foot setback, that there'll be no possibility of a building exposure. Some jurisdictions entertain this as an option, others don't, because it's not allowed in the code. So a lot of times it's referenced to Denver, that's been an accepted practice, but some jurisdictions, do accept it. I do see it having some applicability based on specific buildings. It definitely is applicable for existing buildings that you're trying to redevelop with their proximity to property lines. And as long as this language is still permitted in the IEBC, I'm okay with that. I guess a question, and I understand, if you don't design the 3 GPM per lineal foot over the wall, and not just the opening, but admin mods that I've done have actually required that all of the openings be, that the water washing of those openings be designed for the face of the opening. So it sometimes is larger pipe, different heads, that kind of thing. So I'm not suggesting there's any changes necessarily, David. It does have some applicability.
Okay, thanks for that. Next we have Bill.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, Stephen. I think you bring up some good points. David Wren, I think this is an appropriate change to get back in line with the IBC. As I see it, this doesn't take away the applicant's ability to put in for an administrative modification. And as Stephen so rightly pointed out, that it is still in the IEBC, especially in Chapter 10 of the IEBC, there's tables in there that allow for the openings and the exterior wall protection to remain, as long as you're not going to a higher hazard classification of occupancy group. So I don't see where this really has any detrimental effect. I support it as written. I think it's a good change.
Okay. Aaron, I did see your hand raised at one point. Did you still have a question or no, or a commentary? Okay, great. Bill, your hand, you just spoke. Okay, any other comments or questions from the committee? Being none, I'll open it back up to the general public. Anybody rebuttal and support for this proposal from the general public, please raise your hand if you want to speak. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand.
Kevin, I raised my hand just because I'm the proponent, even though I'm on the committee.
Sure. Okay, go ahead.
So I just want to address some of the comments made. Steve made some comments that, you know, this is effective in some areas, and maybe it is if you have some limited amount of openings that the hydraulics of the sprinkler system can handle it, and it's actually designed properly for it. But there are a lot of instances where you get a large fire next door, and I don't think it's going to be effective at that point. There was also a comment I think made that, you know, that just because of this, you will no longer be allowed to have openings. That is true, but there are design ways around this. You can put windows in that have a fire resistance rating. If you need some glazed area, there are ways to do that without putting a window and water curtains. So that can still be done. Daniel Kraus brought up the exception of 705.8.2, which is the section for protected openings, and there is an exception for water curtains. That is true. But what we're talking about is replacing a fire resistance rated wall with a water curtain. We're not an exception to a protected openings. We're replacing a fire resistance rated wall. So it's not necessarily applicable. We're going way beyond that. The other thing is those sprinklers actually say they are approved for this use, whereas our amendments do not. I think I'm out of time.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for sticking to that. One last call for the general public and support. Anybody wants to speak on that? We do have somebody raising their hand, Daniel, so I'll promote you here. So shortly you should be able to speak, Daniel, and turn on your video.
Okay, so I just wanted to inform the committee of the section. There was a reference to the IEBC, and that if you go to a equal or lesser hazard, there's no reason to have to reduce the number of openings that are allowed. I just want to clarify that even if you're going to an increased hazard, there's specifically a section that allows you to maintain the number of openings in the exterior walls as long as they are protected. And again, going to that exception in 705, protection includes water curtains. So maybe Dave was saying that's a water curtain that's specifically approved for this use, but in any case, you will have existing buildings that, and even if they change to a higher hazard occupancy, they can always put in a water curtain and keep their openings the way they have them. So just so everyone's aware.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. And last call, anybody from the general public wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand if you want to talk. Okay, seeing no more on that, let's change back to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. And one last call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, I'll turn it back over to the committee for anybody that wants to make a nominate or a call for to adopt this or pass it, to table it, to amend it. Anybody wants to talk? Tony, go ahead.
I'd like to propose we pass as written.
Okay,
Yvette? Sorry.
I was just going to second the
Julie.
motion. Yeah,
Okay.
we did it
Julie,
at the same
go ahead.
time.
Oh. All right, cool. I saw both of us go up and didn't know it was first. Sorry. Okay, so there's a motion to pass as written and a second. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none. Let's call for a vote. All those in favor of passing this proposal as written, please raise your hand. I'll start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay. Go ahead and lower your hands. The proposal passes unanimously. Okay, so that was number 17. Let's go to number 18 now. And David, I believe that's you again. But before we get started, it looks like Bill, I don't know if you still have your hand up for voting or if you had a question. Okay. Go ahead, David, and give us our rundown on this.
Did you want to bring it up on the screen?
Yep.
Right, so this proposal is about 707.6. That's the opening requirements for fire barriers. The code limits the length of openings in a fire barrier to 25% of the length of the wall. And there's those 5 exceptions you see there to that. Some of which are really just due to impracticality, like there's one for item 2 for interior exit stairways. You put a door on the end of a stair enclosure that's taking up a third of the length of the wall, so you've exceeded that 25%. So that's what these exceptions are intended to do, to deal with items where it's really not practical. This proposal adds 2 more exceptions to it. If you could go to the second page, items 6 and 7. Item 6 is for openings in shaft enclosures. Get an exception to the 25% rule. That's another spot where it's really not practical to meet that 25%. A good example of that is elevator enclosures are shaft enclosures, yet the elevator door takes up nearly 100% of the length of the wall. So technically, the code doesn't allow elevators right now. And then item 7, excuse me, is another area where it's not practical. It's the chute access rooms for trash chutes, recycle chutes. You get the access rooms that are usually pretty small. So just the door itself easily exceeds the 25%. And then you get at the bottom in the chute discharge room, where you often need some large overhead doors to get the dumpsters out that take up the entire wall. So it's not practical there as well. So this proposal, as you can see on the screen there, this is actually going into the 2024 code. It was approved through committee. It 13-0, no public comments. I think there's actually another proposal that pushed in specifically elevators for the same reason. I believe they both passed, but item 6 is for shaft enclosures, which deal with elevators as well. So the reason to pull this into our code early really is just bring some clarity to the code, as well as consistency in our reviews. Our plan review group has, debated this extensively, how to justify accepting stuff that doesn't appear to be allowed by the code. So I just soon get it in the code. We can have consistent reviews, and we don't have some reviewers rejecting overhead doors and trash rooms and others not. We can get it all on a consistent playing field, and then in 3 years we can pull the amendment back out because it'll be in the code. So that's all I have.
Thanks, David, for the summary. Okay, general public. Well, before we do that, sorry, Shauna, you had something to add as a subject matter expert.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that the committee recognized when they approved this 13-0 that it was common practice. They said that it was absolutely needed and that it was just common practice to do this. So that's why they approved it 13-0.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Okay, general public, anybody that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. We do have somebody. Mark, I'm going to move you so you're allowed to do that. But while that's happening, anybody else from the general public, please raise your hand if you want to speak on that. And Mark, you'll be able to speak here and turn your camera on here momentarily. And you look like you're trying to get on. You'll be speaking in support of this.
Hello, hello.
Okay, we can hear
there
you.
we go. Sorry about that. Hello. Yes, Mark Jelinski, fire protection, mechanical engineer, consulting engineer, Denver practice. And yeah, we need this. We've known this for a long time. Fire dampers in shafts are another thing that's illegal right now. The alternate to doing this, especially say overhead doors, is the listed movable fire wall. The wand door is as a brand name. And yeah, you don't want to do that just in these kind of applications. I think that this absolutely covers the issue. One place, the one place that is of interest is cases where you would otherwise have a wand door required. Sometimes there's fire barriers that are intended to separate occupancies, and I think it's valid that what you're doing here, you're not doing it in a fire wall, and therefore I support this too. I'll leave it at that. This is a needed amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Anybody else from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. And I see, Shauna, you do have your hand. Okay, unlowered it. Okay. So now that there's nobody else from the general public in support, anybody from the general public in opposition that wants to speak, please raise your hand. Anybody in opposition from the general public that wants to speak, please raise your hand. And last and final call for the general public, anybody in opposition that wants to speak, please raise your hand. Seeing none, that throw it back over to the committee for any discussion or questions. Anybody on the committee has any questions for David or any commentary? I know it's getting late in the afternoon. One last final chance for the committee. Anybody that wants to speak up? Okay, throwing it back over to general public. Anybody that wants to speak in support and rebuttal, please raise your hand. Please raise your hand if you want to speak in support from the general public. Anybody from the general public wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Okay, anybody from general public in opposition of this, please, and wants to speak, please raise your hand. Going once, calling it twice, and a third time. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Seeing none, back to the committee for a nomination. I do see David has his hand up. Go ahead.
I move that we approve as written.
Okay, there's David has approved as written. Anybody else? Tony?
Second the motion.
Okay, second. Keith? Keith, are you there? Okay, his hand went down. Okay, so there is a motion to approve as written and a second. I'll call a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, motion passes 13-0, and we'll move forward. The next one would be number 19. David, this is you again. Steve, you have a question before we move on? I think that was a mistake then. Okay. David, while this is pulling up, go ahead.
No question.
And,
Kind of lower.
Okay, sorry, that's all right. Wanted to make sure.
All right, once again, I'm David Wren, speaking for Denver Development Services Department. This proposal is about, we're in section 713 now, shaft enclosures and the required fire resistance rating of those enclosures. Similar to the water curtains proposal to delete our amendment for that. This is another one that I'm trying to bring our code into alignment with the national code. There are no specific characteristics of Denver that would make this proposal necessary in Denver. It is less restrictive than the IBC in terms of fire ratings. And as I'll go through, it's actually poorly written that has some major interpretation issues in my mind. What this current amendment does is it reduces the fire resistance rating for shafts that include piping ducts and vents from 2 hours to 1 hour when you have a building 5 stories or less in certain construction types. You know, one of the main purposes of shafts is to contain a fire to the floor of origin. In which case the contents of that shaft really doesn't matter. So whether there's pipes in there or something else, it doesn't really matter. You want a fire resistant rating to contain that fire. If a fire did get into these shafts, it should be noted that, you know, piping is allowed in here. That could be gas piping that could add fuel to the fire. So I'm not really sure what our amendment really is trying to achieve there. So like I said, I don't think there's any reason to, you know, that Denver should be less restrictive for a fire protection provision. Just for a point of reference, the IBC as well as our chapter 1, the building official himself can't even allow modifications due to practical difficulties if there's any lessening of a fire safety requirement. Yet we have amendments on our book that do just that. Last thing is the current amendment, the wording in it is 5 stories or less. It's really trying to change the base code requirement that deals with whether you connect 4 stories or more. By saying 5 stories or less, there's a big interpretation issue there. I think most people would consider a 5-story building to be 5 stories above grade plane. You could easily have 2 basements under that. So if you interpret this that way, this amendment would allow 7 stories with only a 1 hour, 7 stories connected with only a 1 hour fire rating. I don't know if that's the intent of our amendment, but it certainly could be interpreted that way. And I think I would hope everyone agree that 7 stories connected is a little bit different than 5. So I would hope you support this, bring Denver's amendments in line with the national codes, and as with the water curtains, every other jurisdiction around. As soon as you step outside of Denver, you don't get to use this. So people are figuring it out elsewhere. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, David. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. And last opportunity for the general public for support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Seeing none, we'll go to anybody from the general public in opposition to this proposal. Please raise your hand if you want to speak. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public in opposition that wants to speak, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll turn it back to the committee for discussion. Anybody in the committee have any discussion, comments, questions, anything they want to add to this? Nobody? Everybody getting a little sleepy? Everybody ready to go home? My headphones died, so I had to put in my wired ones. That's how long we've been going. All right, I'll give you one more opportunity for committee members. Anybody that wants to speak, have questions, please raise your hand. Okay, back to general public. Anybody in support that wants to speak, please raise your hand. Anybody in support from the general public wants to speak, please raise your hand. Last and final call for general public and in support, please raise your hand. Okay, next would be opposition from the general public. Anybody who wants to speak, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. And last and final call for general public in opposition of this. Want to speak, please raise your hand. Seeing none, the committee, it's up to you on a motion now. Bill, go ahead.
A motion to approve is submitted.
Okay. David?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a second. Okay, seeing no more hands raised, I will call a vote. Everybody please lower your hand. I will do that for you. All those in favor to approve this as written, please raise your hand. Counting 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, the proposal is passed unanimously. You can lower your hand. Okay, it looks like we might have time for one more, maybe two more. We never say one more because when you say one more, there's always two more, or it's bad juju. So we'll say there's a few more left, but we'll move on to number 20 on that. And guess who's presenting this one? David, go ahead while this loads. If you want to just start talking, you can, but it's loading here and I'll pull up on the screen.
All right. David Wren, again, representing Development Services Department of Denver. This is along the same vein as that last one. We currently have there's a continuity section for shaft enclosures that kicks you to some other sections of the code that essentially would require your any of the fire barriers or horizontal assemblies of that shaft enclosure to be supported by fire rated assemblies with at least the same rating. We have an exception for shafts with piping ducts and vents, same as the last one, in non-rated construction types that you can support these with non-rated assemblies. Again, this is trying to bring the code up, our code up to national standards. There's no specific characteristics of Denver that would require this amendment. It's less restrictive than the IBC, and has lots of inconsistencies with the rest of the code, which causes some problems. I won't reiterate some stuff that I said the last time. Same thing about like building official can't lessen the fire resistance or fire safety provisions, but our amendments do just that. So I want to focus on the inconsistencies here that this creates. So this amendment, as currently written, talks about non-fire rated assemblies, which in my mind would be a floor ceiling assembly in this case. What it's trying to be an exception to is section 707.5.1 for fire barriers that says, basically all supporting construction of fire barriers has to have the same fire rating. So it leaves the question, it's kind of unclear, what if a fire barrier is supported by beams and columns that are not rated? I wouldn't call those assemblies. So our exception, it's unclear if that applies or not. When you don't really have an assembly, you just have a bare structural element. Section 713.11 for bottom enclosures of shafts requires the construction to be same rating or at least the same rating as the shaft. Well, this assembly at the bottom might be supporting the shaft up above. So we have the base code saying that it needs a fire rating. Then we have our amendment that says it doesn't need a fire rating. Which one governs? I don't know. 704.1 requires structural members to have fire resistance rating not less than fire rated assemblies that it supports. That section does have a bunch of exceptions to it. Unfortunately, one of the exceptions is not this one. So we have one section of the code saying I need a fire rating, and then you get to our amendments and it says we don't. So which one controls? Lastly, section 713.9 for fire resistant joint systems would require the joint at the head of one of these walls, let's say it goes to the underside of the floor, and then you have another shaft wall above the floor, it requires that joint to be a fire resistant joint system. Well, if that floor is non-rated because of our assembly, you can't comply with that section, because all fire resistant rated joints are tested between a fire resistant rated, or between two fire resistance rated assemblies. You need, the wall has to be rated and the floor has to be rated. If you don't have that, the tested assemblies don't apply. So we have this hole in the code that we have this requirement that really there's no way for us to enforce that. If we can't enforce it, you know, who knows what's going in there. So that's an obvious potential failure point of the fire barrier right at the head of that wall where it goes to the underside of the floor. For all of these reasons, hope you support this. Bring our code into alignment with the national codes, and as I've said before, every other jurisdiction. They don't get allowance for this as soon as you step outside of Denver, so I don't see why it should be any different in Denver. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the summary of that. So I'll open up to the general public. Anybody that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. And last call for the general public in support of this. Anybody wants to speak, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go to opposition from the general public. If you want to speak, please raise your hand. Anybody in opposition from the general public, please raise your hand if you want to speak. And last call for the general public. Anybody in opposition that wants to speak, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll turn it over to the committee for conversation. Anybody from the committee have anything to talk about? Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, David, just a quick note. I applaud your effort on these last several issues. As a consultant who works with clients all over the country designing in Denver, the more that we have the Denver code in line with the base code, the easier it becomes. So thank you for making my job easier.
Anybody else from the committee that wants to speak? Last call from the committee. If you want to speak, go ahead. Seeing none. One last opportunity for the general public in support. If you want to speak, raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Final call for the general public that wants to speak in support, raise your hand. Okay, anybody from the general public in opposition wants to speak, please raise your hand. Second call for the general public in opposition if they want to speak. And third call, anybody from the general public in opposition, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none. Committee, do you have any motions? Aaron?
I propose that we adopt the proposal exactly as stated.
Okay. Anybody else? Julie?
Second the motion to accept.
Okay. So I'll call a vote since there's a motion and a second. Everybody in favor of adopting this proposal as written, please raise your hand. And I'll start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. All right. Proposal is passed. Go ahead and lower your hands. 13-0, unanimously. So with that being said, it is a minute and a half until 5 o'clock. So I will thank you all for joining from the general public and the committee members. I welcome feedback from anybody. So please, I'll stay on the line. Please feel free to leave, but also please feel free to leave feedback. And I'll open it up to the general public if they want to leave feedback too. Just raise your hand. But thank you all again. We got through quite a bit today. We always put more on the calendar, on the agenda than we know we're going to get through. So don't feel frustrated that we didn't get through that many. We did get through a lot. And thank you for all your commitment to this and great conversations today. And we'll see you next time. I'll stop the recording.
Thanks, everyone.
And
See you.
anybody that wants to stay
Thank
on,
you.
they can stay on.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe out there.
Hey, Kevin.